Why is your pocket running short faster? Why are prices soaring? According to an ILO study, most industries faced above 60% reduction in sale. Both key and non-key industries started laying off.
This is the Confluence Simplified. To understand the inflation in Bangladesh, we have to begin with the global inflation, since everyone else is suffering too. A lot of it has something to do with the US, because of their enormous stimulus. So let's begin. First, COVID happened. Lockdown was announced in almost every country sooner or later. Many people, like taxi drivers, couldn't go to work. Due to decreased income, people started spending less. In the US, according to JP Morgan's analysis of credit cards, people reduced 50% of their expenditure on non-essential products and 15 to 20% of expenditure on essential products as well. Not just the United States of America, the rest of the world followed. This infographic by Visual Capitalist shows how expenditure reduced in every category. The more blue the sign, the lower the expenses. This leads to a decrease in sales. According to an ILO study, most industries faced above 60% reduction in sales. If products aren't sold, companies don't make profit and they begin laying off workers to reduce operational costs. Thus, both key and non-key industries started laying off employees. Because many people lost jobs, they decreased spend further, creating a cycle of decreased consumptions. If this continues, companies will incur further losses and eventually economies might have entered worldwide recession. As a remedy, governments provided stimulus package in the forms of easy loans, free payments, etc. Trillions of dollars were provided by the governments around the world. The US alone has announced $5.2 trillion stimulus, which is essentially easy money for everyone to spend for businesses, households, and individuals. To put it in perspective, $5.2 trillion is 11 times the GDP of Bangladesh and 1.5 times the GDP of India, the country with the largest population in the world. People, now with money to spend, started spending it online. Some invested in cryptocurrency, which eventually crashed and they lost money. Others ordered products online. Now people have money. Companies have money. They are spending. Everything is good, right? No! Here comes the global supply chain crisis. Ships? According to UNCTAD, over 80% of the volume of international trade in goods is carried by sea. Now this increased spending, as we mentioned earlier, required increased supply. But the supply chain, precisely the shipping system, was broken. Why is supply chain important? Look at the countries where raw materials for an iPhone comes from. Hence, a supply chain disruption can stop production and sales. This is what happened. How did this begin?
Overseas, those COVID lockdowns in China are again threatening the global supply chain. Hundreds of ships at anchor off the port of Shanghai.
A lot of states in the US started lifting COVID lockdowns in late April of 2020. But China still had lockdowns in place. Even if factories were open, products couldn't move from one country to another because some parts still had lockdown. But the stimulus, as mentioned earlier, enabled people to order more. So there is an increase in demand. Hence, when lockdowns eased around the world had a lot of products to ship. More and more ships moved to the US West Coast. Just a bit too much for the port's capacity. And shipping is a chain. If there is a backlog once, it lengthens, because ports usually do not have spare capacity to cut down on cost. So, no extra docks, no place for keeping excess containers, No extra railway lines or roads to get containers out of the port. The available labor at the ports also matters. There are too few labors for too many cargoes to handle. There is just not enough supplies. People have more money but less products. That means inflation. To curb inflation, the US Federal Reserve had to decrease the amount of US dollars in circulation. And how it's done? Fed prints dollars when commercial banks ask them for loans. In return, banks pay the Fed interest at a rate called Federal Funds Rate or Fed Rate. When Fed increases Fed rate, banks don't easily ask Fed for extra money, so no new dollars printed. Since February 2022, Fed started to hike Fed rate. From 0.25%, it increased to 5.25% within just 15 months. So, $144.5 billion were printed from March 2021 to March 2022. But then, Fed started hiking rates and only $55.25 billion were printed from March 2022 to March 2023. What about the dollars already printed? Actually, by selling securities like Treasury bill, Fed can take away money from circulation. If you buy bonds from Fed, you give your dollars to the Fed in return of a bond, but you cannot use bonds like dollars. You cannot order from Amazon and pay with a bond, so your dollar is no more in circulation. And the Fed has sold $95 billion worth bonds every month since March 2022. Even in January 2023, President of the Dallas Fed told in a speech, "I am confident that we have room to continue running off our assets for quite some time." In just 2 years, from February 2020 to 2022, the US dollars in circulation surged by $437 billion during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, in February 2023, the increase was a mere $65 billion. Meanwhile, the world economy and trade volume saw significant growth. This means that the demand for dollars has increased globally while the supply remains limited. This created a problem for the world: dollar crisis. The forex market facilitates foreign currency exchange. Developing countries like Bangladesh face a devaluation of their currency due to a scarcity of dollars. This crisis affects emerging economies the most, as seen in past financial crises. There is a correlation between the Fed rate and Bangladesh's foreign reserve, with each Fed rate hike leading to a decrease in Bangladesh's reserves. Recent collapses of the US banks indicate that the US is also affected. Exchange rates can be fixed or floating. Bangladesh has a fixed exchange rate determined by the central bank. Due to the scarcity of dollars, the exchange rate is increased to discourage buying and encourage selling. Dollar earnings come from exports, remittances, and foreign investment. However, exports don't increase as other countries are also cutting imports, and remittances play a crucial role. But when sent through informal channels like Hundi, Bangladesh Bank doesn't receive the dollars. The IMF suggests floating the exchange rate, but this may lead to further increases in exchange rates as observed in other countries. Some countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar maintain a fixed exchange rate. However, the benefits of a floating exchange rate are futile unless Hundi is stopped. Cutting imports further may not be possible due to the need for raw materials and energy sources, which must be imported. And that wraps up this video with a cool bow.